Hello and welcome to another episode of GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Stokell, National Sales Manager at Leasing. Hi Matt.
Hi Kate, how are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. How are you?
Good, yeah, really well, thank you, really well.
Matt, this is the first time you've joined us on GreenFleet Talks, so by way of introduction, could you tell me a little bit more about Leasing?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the first one. Thanks, Kate. So Lookers Leasing are a part of Lookers Group PLC. We are one of the divisions within said PLC. Lookers will be known by a lot of the audience for their retail association with the automotive sector. We are the B2B element of a B2C PLC group, really. And what we do is we provide fleet provisions for public sector and corporate fleets.
Great. Okay, good. So we're talking to the right person. That's always a great start.
It is.
So Matt, today we are discussing the growth of electric vehicles and what more needs to happen in that transition to mass market. The latest figures from the SMMT show that battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles reached a very impressive 17% share of new vehicle registrations in July, which is great news. What would you say are the main reasons that the sales of EVs are picking up pace?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons, Kate, to be honest with you. The main one for me is being led and driven by the government. So if you look at the plug-in grant that's been available now in various formats, so we started off with a £5,000 government grant. That's been reduced to £3,500 now, but that is an incentive to allow electric vehicle adoption to be at a level where you're actually getting a vehicle that is achievable in terms of a price. That has really helped drive prospective buyers and leasers into that market. What has also happened is the government have set in stone a taxation rate for benefit in kind. What that has allowed for is actually a driver to go knocking on the door of whoever administers their fleet to say, my benefit in kind is going to be X if I drive a plug-in hybrid or an EV vehicle. It's a significant chunk off a BEV for a BEV than it is for an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle. And so what that's leading to is a mass adoption of these vehicles. So we're seeing a real increase in the amount of vehicles that are being quoted from ICE previously now over to battery electric vehicles. So 12 months ago, we were looking at 17% in terms of number of vehicles quoted that were for plug-in hybrids or for battery electric vehicles. We're now up to 45% of our vehicles quoted. That, Kate, is on cars. Commercial vehicles are separate, but it's certainly a big number and a big swing in terms of where we're seeing the growth, and that shows by the SMMT figure that you've mentioned earlier on. So far, I also think that from a manufacturer's perspective, they've got targets to hit as part of the CAFE agreement that they've all committed to. These units that they have to commit to, or there will be fines if they don't commit or if they go over these unit allowances, has driven the manufacturers to produce the vehicles and make sure that the vehicles are available. And that availability has obviously meant that they can actually sell those vehicles. And so that's also driven the wave of increase there.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. So in terms of all new vehicle registrations, the market share 17%, but as a leasing company, you're seeing that much higher at 45%, which it really supports how valuable the leasing model is to the EV market, I guess all bundled in with that total cost of ownership piece.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at what a EV or battery electric vehicle and a plug-in hybrid vehicle can offer you from a total cost of contract, whole life cost, whatever you would like to call it, in terms of the benefit to the organization that's procuring that vehicle, there are actually significant benefits for that organization and also for the driver. Now, I'll mention the driver benefits, but in terms of what are the benefits to the organization of looking at procuring these vehicles, the key one for me is the the MPG that's achievable on the plug-in hybrid. Now, whether that's achievable in the real world is up for debate. The plug-in hybrids need to be used, and they need to be used correctly in order for them to actually achieve those MPGs, and that is charging, once, twice a day, and then yes, you can achieve those. But where you see the real gains is with the full EV vehicles, and what they have allowed for is that benefit of the fuel cost. So when you're looking at a total cost of a contract from a fleet perspective, one of the key elements of a cost behind a contract is what is the fuel element. And we're looking at the moment, when we do our total cost of contract work here, the fuel element, we're looking at the government reimbursement rate, which is 4 pence per mile. And if you look at the current rates for petrol and current rate for diesel, they're up at 11 and 12 pence per mile. So you look at that saving that's across the equivalent size vehicle. Let's compare a Tesla Model 3 here and a BMW 3 Series, similar size saloon vehicles. The savings that you can achieve there on the fuel are 2/3 of the cost. So, if you're spending £250 a month on diesel for one particular employee, rationalize that down, you'd be looking at around about £70 a month on the equivalent equivalent electric vehicle.
And it's all of these things, Matt, it's such a compelling case, if you like, and such a compelling story that if I flip that 17% on its head, then you kind of have to say, well, that means that 83% of vehicles are still ICE. So why, given all the great things that you've highlighted, why are businesses still choosing an ICE vehicle over an EV?
It's a very good question. There are, if I look at our fleet in isolation, so what we've got here, we have a vast amount of commercial vehicles on fleet, and I feel that the commercial vehicle switch through to plug-ins in any format, whether that's full electric or plug-in hybrid, are slightly behind by about 18 months, I think. Well, 12 to 18 months in terms of their development. So when you're looking at running a fleet that includes commercial vehicles, the problem that you've got is you've got to have a vehicle that's fit for purpose. And there's a lot of myth busting that needs to be done in and around whether or not these vehicles are fit for purpose or not. For example, if I've got a ton payload in a commercial vehicle, and I actually put that ton in the back, what does that represent to my EV range? What does that do to that? And those are conversations that we have with our customers and with prospective customers to say, look, this is what we need to do. What I would advise is you test drive one of these vehicles in a real world scenario, and does it work for you or does it not? And then we can work out if that's the way to go. But when you're looking at commercial vehicles, and especially when you're dealing with that as a market, they are significantly more expensive in terms of the rentals, regardless of whole life cost, significantly more expensive. And also, they're deemed to be a need where if you're looking at a just-in-time delivery, for example, yes, an EV or plug-in can work. But if you're looking at a van that needs to do 400 or 500 miles in a day on a delivery, then what you need to look at is the structure in behind what that working day looks like. And if you can change that structure, which is easily achievable, Kate, because what actually happens with EVs is you give somebody an EV to test drive, or you give the fleet administrator or whoever it may be an EV, and you say, you go and factor that into your working day and test drive and see what you think. And they come back and they say, well, actually, I was doing that long journey, or I was delivering in the commercial vehicle world, I was delivering that, but I had to stop for half an hour for a lunch break and to go to the toilet or whatever that may be. And that allows me to charge it up again. And then once you start to get them into the mindset of it's not actually too much different to what you're doing in your working day, it's just how you fuel the vehicle that's different. So with an ICE vehicle, in the morning, you go to your local petrol station and you'd fill it up. With a plug-in vehicle, a battery electric vehicle especially, if you're lucky enough to have a home charge point, great. But if not, then instead of having that kind of first stop off in the morning, you factor it into your afternoon, or you factor it into early morning, you factor it into your journey. And there's nobody who works as whether it's a delivery driver or whatever it may be, especially in the commercial vehicle world, who won't stop for that comfort break and who won't stop for that opportunity to charge that vehicle. And I think again, it's that myth busting by saying, yes, there are, you can turn yourself onto the negative side and say, what about this? What about this? What about that? But when we discuss all of these points with our customers or with our prospective customers, there is a way to kind of make this work. And actually, once you make it work, it actually works. 9 times out of 10, we're seeing, why didn't we do this earlier? The benefits to it are actually outweighing the negatives that we had. The key point to it, though, Kate, with all of these things is get the stakeholders involved. When you are looking at doing something with regards to your fleet, there are so many people within an organization that have a say or would like to have a say, that if you get those stakeholders involved early on, I think you'll benefit from having that input as you start to roll these things out.
Well, let's probe that a little bit more, Matt, because it's all too often conversations about EVs start with the vehicles themselves, and then people are starting to talk about recharging infrastructure, and what type of charging hardware do I need? But there are other aspects. So beyond the vehicle and the recharging equipment, what are the aspects that you think businesses need to consider when they're switching to EV?
It's a very good question, and again, I would always start with those stakeholders. So start with getting your stakeholders together. It's almost like a think tank. Get some key people involved. Get them to ask questions first of what's going on internally. So then you find out what your fleet actually looks like and what the needs are. And then once you've got that kind of list of information of what you need, then approach us from a fleet perspective to say, okay, what are the key criteria here when switching over to EV? For me, the key element to it is, have you got facility or not to charge the vehicles? So that is a key element of this. So if you have the opportunity to be able to home charge, fantastic. If you're going to be able to home charge, do your employees have home chargers already? Do they not? How do you then give them or provide them with home chargers? That becomes an issue in terms of, if you pay for it as a company, is there a benefit in kind to be had for that particular driver? If not, what schemes are out there? What we do, Kate, is we advise. We have numerous ways to be able to roll out EV and plug-in hybrid fleets. What we do is we advise based on each individual customer's requirements. So there isn't a, there you go, there's your blueprint for how to roll it out. It's, we go in, we listen, we find out what's going on, then we say, okay, this is what you need to do to be able to adapt your fleet from ICE over to plug-in hybrids and EV vehicles. And that works. It's almost like that bespoke element, Kate, that gives you the allowance to be able to make a difference in terms of what they're doing over there. Just thinking, going back to your original question, and I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but what other things should you be looking at from as a fleet administrator or a procurement team if you are looking at rolling out battery electric vehicles? You certainly need to be looking at the procurement of how you do your vehicles. So a lot of our customers previously in the past have procured their vehicles based on the rental only. When you're looking at EVs, you've got to look at that whole life cost element of the vehicle. What's it costing you in all elements? There are NI benefits, there are fuel saving benefits, as I mentioned. All those things come into a package. Then you look to procure in that manner. Also, you've got to look at what facilities have you got at your head office. Do you have charge points there to be able to help your employees get to and from work if they don't have home charge points? On the back of that, I would advise putting in some sort of vehicle policy change. So when you go from ICE to EV, it's a change in how you run those vehicles. There are different elements of what needs to be done. So we talk our customers and prospective customers through vehicle policy changes, what needs to be on there, how does that look, guide them through the process from start to finish to make sure they can mobilize properly, Kate, I would say.
Because for me, that policy, not necessarily the most glamorous piece of work, but it really is a cornerstone for making sure that all the wider considerations, not just what car do you want, have been taken into account. And you've already mentioned home charging. Are you prepared to have a home charger? You, as the employee, you are going to be responsible for making sure you can start each day with a full charge and complete your journeys. And then the wider behavioural stuff around planning that day's activities and the reimbursement, which you've also touched on. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that EV policy, and that's probably stimulates that stakeholder buy-in conversation anyway, in terms of making sure that finance are happy, HR are happy.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Kate, in
yeah,
terms of it might feel like a huge project and a big change especially when you're talking about a fleet, which is a big cost to a lot of organizations. But if you get it right and you implement that, that process first time round and you get that right, there's no reason to fear the switch. Okay, and actually you will benefit from it. The one of the key, just another element just to chuck into this mix, is there's a big piece at the moment. Previously, I'd say about 2 or 3 years ago, it was cool to adopt EV, whereas now it's a good, it's a good thing for your PR, and it's a good thing for organizations as part of their marketing spiel. But actually, what we're advising is, when you're looking at, if you're a business and you're tendering for business opportunities yourself, one of the key criteria at the moment is sustainability. Is what do you do from your corporate social responsibility? What innovative schemes have you got within your business that allow you to demonstrate that on a tender process? Now, no matter what organization you are in, these things are coming through. I'm experiencing it when I'm doing tenders for a business that we're trying to win over here, and that can be anywhere up to 40% of a tender criteria. And if you can put into words and into practice, we've reduced our carbon footprint by X. One of the things that we do for our customers, and it's really valuable, is we've got what I call a CO2 reduction dashboard. So we can go back as far as the customer would like us to. We can show a dashboard of their CO2 over, because we know what their cars are, so we know what the CO2 is, and we can show where their CO2 levels have been across from, let's say they started an average of 130 and they've adopted this, and we're now 3 years in and it's now at 70. And you can put that into a tender process when you're applying for business, to say, look at what we're doing. And so there's added benefit to you as an organization to say, it's not just the cost, it's not just the fact that we are looking to save the planet, which is, in the end, that's what this is about. The drive to EV has been forced on the manufacturers, but actually it's been forced for a reason, and that's because we need to reduce the amount of CO2 output that we're putting into the globe and out there. So
I couldn't agree more, and it's something we don't talk about a great deal. But any business that is providing services to large corporate customers, and I would also add central and local government services, you're really going to start seeing that on every piece of procurement they do, they're going to be looking at this company is providing me this service, but what vehicles are they using? Because actually it counts towards their net zero credentials as well. So you're absolutely right. This will gives fleets that are tendering for business a competitive edge.
absolutely.
Or worse, if you look at it the other way, if they haven't done this, they could find themselves ruled out of that tender process fairly early.
Absolutely. We've had customers over at our end who have changed their mission statements, who have had a change in kind of board of directors, and said, no, everything that we need to do needs to be driven by this, and our suppliers need to be achieving these levels as well. Otherwise, we'll have to look elsewhere. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing, because it shows responsibility, but also, it's driving the change, which is great.
It is great. It is great. So we're widening the conversation out a little bit now, I think, because we focus a lot on what fleets need to do and what businesses need to do to reduce their own vehicle emissions. But what role do local authorities need to take to maximise EV uptake in their areas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, Kate, to be honest with you. If you look at what's going on at the moment, there is there isn't any centralized scheme going on. Let's put it that way. Local authorities have got their own jurisdiction over what they want to achieve and what they want to do. I'll give an example. I live in York, so that's my local authority, and they're looking at going over to a full green EV kind of ring around the city, such as the London congestion zone that we've got at the moment. But there's been no government centralised effort to say every city or town in the UK needs to be doing this. It's driven by the local authorities in order for them to be able to do it, which is interesting because I think, like anything in life, if you go in at the top, it's easier to, from a rollout perspective, it's easier to make decisions and make them stick. So it is a bit divisive at the moment. There are issues with them actually keeping up pace with the change. So what we've got at the moment is we've got, as we discussed at the top of this interview, we've got a real kind of migration from ICE over to battery electric vehicles, which is great. But the problem that the local planning and local government organisations have got is, where do we put all the infrastructure that's required in order for be able to cater for these vehicles? So they are improving, and it's certainly coming along in a faster rate than it was, let's say, 12 months ago, and then 12 months before that. But there's still a long way to go. My vision of how this needs to look from an infrastructure point of view for local governments is that if there is a car park, we need to have a charge point in every space in order to make this work. And that's nowhere near where we are at the moment. So there's an issue with, okay, yes, some of my peers will say, well, we'll have a switch over from hydrogen in the future. I do believe that will happen for any vehicle over 3.5 tons. But so there might be a mix of the two. But I can certainly say, if I go down to my local supermarket at the moment, there's been an effort from, let's say, a Tesco's, who have got a partnership with VW. You might have seen the advert on the TV where they've been installed free of charge 7-kilowatt chargers. There is an effort, but I could count them, on each finger and say how many there is there. Whereas if we're going to see this whole migration, which the government have put a target of 2030 for that to happen, that means that we need to see a lot of improvement on the infrastructure. And I think, as far as local authorities and their input on that, they need to make sure that it goes through every single planning application, every single replanning application. For example, one of the incentives that's been put onto new house builds at the moment is every new house that's been built as part of X contract must have a home charge point installed on it. Fantastic incentive. That needs to carry on. We need to go one step further. We need to be looking at every office that's being built, per car park space, that there's if the charge point isn't installed, at least there's the infrastructure underneath to be able to make that happen. I think that's
and that is happening, Matt. There's certainly EU guidelines that are being rolled out at a country level, including the UK, even though we're not part of the EU anymore, that will do that. But you kind of hinted at it, and I fear that you're correct in that a lot of these guidelines say that 10% of all parking spaces need to be EV ready or have charge points, and maybe, if we're not careful, our requirement will go beyond 10%, and the legislation will be out of date before it's even really gained traction. But we'll see. And I totally agree with you in terms of greater coordination at a central government and helping the local governments, because it does rather feel that they've all been told to go away and develop their transport plans, and you've got 60 different local authorities around the country all sitting there thinking, goodness, how are we going to do this?
Absolutely. I think that there's there's budget for it, so it's how they allocate it and how they go about it, I think is the tricky point. I mean, if and as and when I we've got a partnership with an EV charge point organisation here at Lookers, and the latest stats are that 1% of houses in the UK currently have charge points. I think if they can up that to get that, to a higher level, and make sure that the home charging becomes the first point of call for charging, then potentially the legislation that's out there at the moment is fit for purpose. But that's tough, and not everybody can afford to put a home charge point in. Not everybody can afford to have that kind of luxury of having an EV vehicle as well, from a for whether that be for a company car, whether that be for a retail car. Whilst we're focused on fleet here, if we're looking at what we're actually trying to achieve and what this is all about, is that net zero, road to zero. It's reducing the carbon footprint and reducing the CO2 output that's going out there. So there is a lot of work to be done, and I think for me it needs to be centralized rather than dished out into every authority.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. It has been a pleasure talking to you. That is about all we've got time for, and I would like to say thank you to Lookers Leasing for joining GreenFleet Talks. And thank you, Matt, and thank you for watching, and please tune in to GF365 again soon.
Thank you, Kate. Very much appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Matt.